the basis of this is in positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement in the left top side, positive punishment at the bottom left, and negative punishment. Now, positive and negative mean adding and subtracting. They don't mean anything else. And positive reinforcement, therefore, means, if you can see the blue line where it says on the right-hand side, horse likes, and on the left-hand, horse doesn't like, and on the green line, behaviour that we want and behaviour that we don't. Like, we don't want kicking, but we do want going forward. So therefore, positive reinforcement is adding something that the horse likes to produce a behaviour that we want. So in other words, if the horse, when we use it in animal training, it might be that if he picks up his leg, we can say, good boy, and give him a scratch or give him food, and maybe he'll repeat that. We can do the same thing with negative reinforcement by tapping his leg with a stick and lifting his leg in the air. And when he lifts it, then we stop tapping. So negative reinforcement, the negative means removal of something he doesn't like to make a behaviour that we do want. And the two together are really valuable. And so what we try to promote in Pony Club is really just doing what you've always done, but making it more succinct and saying, you know, if you want the horse to stop and he's normally heavy, as soon as he's light and he stops correctly, we can say, good boy, and give him a scratch, as well as release the rein pressure. And it's just really those two things. So as you can see, it's really not, it's not difficult. On the bottom sides, we've got positive punishment, which is adding something the horse doesn't like to make a behaviour go away. So, you know, he bites us, so we give him a smack, and hopefully he won't bite us again. Negative punishment is like the naughty corner. It's when we remove something that he likes to make a behaviour go away. And we don't really use that very much. An example might be that if the horse is pawing while he's tied up, if you go to him when he's pawing, you'll be rewarding that behaviour. But if you turn around and walk away, for him, pawing's of no value whatsoever. If the dog jumps up on you and you turn around and give him no attention, that's a way that dog trainers teach people to avoid that behaviour. As I mentioned, though, our work is in the top half. It's in the use of negative and positive reinforcement. We don't need to punish horses too much. And the bottom part, and hopefully if we do the top part, well, we won't need to do it at all. So combined reinforcement is really the use of the two together. So a little bit about negative reinforcement. It's really quite simple. It's just got the aspect of pressure, in that we can be using the reins, we can be using our legs by squeezing with the legs or kicking our reins through pulling the reins or increasing pressure of the mouth. The most important part is the release. So we teach children to remember to say that the pressure motivates, but the release trains. And that's really important, just understanding that it's the release, the timing. It helps you load the horse into the trailer by stopping the pressure exactly when he's given the step forward that you wanted. When we look at it in terms of three parts, we can say, well, there's a light aid that starts, because we always start with that. So we want the horse to stop, so we go light aid, and he's saying, no, didn't read that one, and I'm not stopping. So we increase the pressure, and he stops, and we immediately soften the pressure. Now, as this pony gets better at it, the softening of the pressure becomes more and more subtle. It doesn't need to be a massive loopy rein release. It might in the beginning to really make it obvious, but soon it just becomes a softening of the fingers, and it's all done through the closing of the fingers, as you know. And so again, there's no difference. It's just teaching the child to begin with a light aid, increase the pressure, and soften for that response. And how we can teach them to do it. The easiest way, and I teach adults to do this too, when people mostly come to me with behaviour problems, I go back and just check these basic things out, and looking at how they use the legs and the reins, and they might say, no, but I use my seat. And I say, yeah, I know you do, but that's the icing on the cake. There's something rotten down underneath the icing, and that's what you've got to fix. It's the pressure release part. And so always remember that, because it makes such a big difference. And you go back and you look at how the horse stops. It's really useful to think of it that he does it in 3 beats of the front legs. Think of the front legs all the time for the timing part. So when you first ask him to stop, that might be on the right front leg, Then the increased pressure is on the left front leg, and the softening is the third beat, which is now 0. He's stopped. When we want him to go forward, we squeeze in the first step of one front leg. He's going, but he's not quite going sufficiently. And then the second step, and by the third step, if we took a photograph of him, it would look as if he'd been walking for many meters or kilometers. So light aid, strong aid, release. So we often say it like this for the children: please, that's the please part, do it, thank you. Now, also during the please, we have to think of the position of the rider. That also, when we say please, the rider needs to engage their core and not just slump forward, because when we ask anything else, the chances are the horse is going to flip him forward out of the saddle and it's not going to work. So those elements of position never change, the importance of them. So it's basically the release that works. In positive reinforcement, it's all about adding something that the horse wants immediately when he gives the right response. Now, that can be useful for certain things. Both my sons train dressage horses, and they both use positive reinforcement for things like training passage and piaffe, because it really makes it faster to do it. I'm not saying, and we're certainly not saying in equitation science, we need to revert to a solely positive reinforcement strategy for training, because that could be dangerous, because as yet there's no evidence that a child would be safe on a pony solely food trained for stop and go. I wouldn't. I want to see way more evidence than that. We do know with negative reinforcement, the use of pressure release, that horses have been able to stop in war. Well, not always well, but certainly mostly. We know that pressure release works even in challenging situations. In other words, using the reins as brakes and the legs as the accelerator. But nonetheless, positive reinforcement has a really big place and an increasingly important place in training. But mostly it'll be things like when we say good boy to the horse, just think to teach children to always pay it by scratching. Because if you just say the word, we presume that the praise is rewarding in itself. Well, they have to learn that it is. It's not necessarily relevant to an animal that eats grass that when we say good boy, that it means anything that's useful to him. But giving him something he wants, it could be a food treat, but it could also be scratching, which I think is so convenient to teach kids to do that well. It also taps into what we call attachment theory, and that is creating a better bond between horse and rider by touch and scratching at the base of the neck. There's studies that show that when you scratch horses at the base of the neck, that it lowers heart rate by 10 beats per minute, regardless if it's a human or a horse that does it. And recognising that reward has to be immediate. And the same with negative reinforcement. Our release must be instant. That's the timing part. We can't reward him for jumping fence number 7 well by giving him a good pat at the end of the round. It's nice to give him a good pat at the end of the round. I'm not saying don't do that. But we've really got to think more about what happens at that time of the good or the bad behaviour. And this is just a little video. It's very short, but it's just some work we did with elephants to show this elephant had never been able to pick up a stick. And this is some work we did last year in Thailand to, just with reward, there's no sound, I don't think, but he picked from and then we give him a food reward for doing that. Now, just exploring that in clicker training can be useful, and as coaches, I think you should know it. You should definitely explore it, look it up on the internet, learn about clicker training, then decide for yourself where it's relevant. But, don't just disdain it without knowing it. So that's positive reinforcement. Punishment is pretty much ineffective because it can create problems between the person and the horse. What's the dose of punishment? That's a problem. And the timing of it is also a problem. And again, I'm not saying don't do it, because if the horse bites or kicks, you might have to do something to stop it in its tracks from doing it, from repeating it. You definitely don't want to reward it. But we have to teach children to be very careful with it, because there's an old saying in Finnish, which Kira Kirkland taught me years ago, that is, when you have a hammer in your hand, all your problems start looking like nails. And I think that's the problem, with the stick, with the whip. We've got to be teaching kids how to use it. And that's why we decided we should implement a whip and spur policy for the little children, so that they could only use them when the DC or whoever's in charge gives the go-ahead to do it, that sort of whip license. Because for one thing, if nothing else, it will teach children to respect the use of the whip, and that we don't condone just, giving kids weapons and beating the crap out of their horses. Negative punishment is removing something that the horse likes, as I said, when he does something wrong, and that's like time out that they do with kids in kindergarten, but as I said, it's not that useful for horses, so I don't need to do it. The problem with it is often it's not immediate. It's got to be immediate. So if you're going to walk away from the horse when he does something wrong, make sure you do it at the right moment. Don't just leave it and go to him and then walk away, because it might not work so well. But regardless, it's not very effective.